A desperate call for help. The stars over the planet Xylor sparkled like diamonds, but no one was looking at the sky. On the surface, chaos reigned. Cities burned as the relentless enemy fleet bombarded them from above. Screams filled the air as civilians flooded through the streets, seeking shelter that no longer existed. The Galactic Alliance's High Council gathered in their grand chamber, a towering room filled with holograms of their member worlds. Leaders from across the galaxy, representing dozens of species, argued in desperation. Their voices overlapped in a cacophony of fear and frustration. "This is hopeless," shouted Chancellor Torvin, a green-skinned alien with sharp, insect-like features. "We cannot hold them back any longer. We've already lost 5 colonies in 3 days." Ambassador Lyris, a feathered creature from the planet Nera, raised her wings in protest. "We need reinforcements. Our fleets are scattered and broken. If we don't act now, Xylor will fall by sunrise." "What reinforcements?" growled General Cottle, a muscular, wolf-like alien with piercing yellow eyes. "We've sent every ship we had, and they were crushed like insects. This enemy is unlike anything we've ever faced." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The enemy was the Swarm, a mysterious and brutal force that seemed to have no end. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their tactics unpredictable. No one knew where they had come from or what they wanted, only that they destroyed everything in their path. As the leaders stared at one another in despair, a small voice broke the silence. It belonged to a young diplomat, an alien with shimmering blue skin. "What about the humans?" she asked timidly. The room erupted into laughter and scoffs. "The humans," Torvin sneered. "They're a backwater species. Their fleet is tiny. What could they possibly do?" "But they are known for their ingenuity," the diplomat insisted. "And their history. They have survived wars that would have destroyed other civilizations. Perhaps they can surprise us." Cottle slammed his clawed hand on the table. "You want to bring humans into this war? Do you even understand the risk? They are unpredictable, dangerous, and arrogant. If we involve them, there's no telling what they might do." Despite the objections, the idea began to take hold. The Alliance had no other options. Their fleets were crippled, their colonies falling one by one. If they didn't act soon, the Swarm would consume them all. Reluctantly, Chancellor Torvin leaned forward and pressed a button on the table. A hologram of a human appeared, a tall figure in a sleek, dark uniform. His eyes were sharp, and his expression calm, almost unnervingly so. This was Admiral Jonathan Kane, the commander of Earth's military forces. "Admiral Kane," Torvin said stiffly, "the Galactic Alliance is requesting your assistance. Our colonies are under attack by a force we cannot defeat." Kane studied the room, his gaze sweeping over the nervous faces of the alien leaders. He didn't look surprised. "You've waited a long time to ask for our help," he said, his voice steady. Lyris, the feathered ambassador, stepped forward. We were hesitant. Humanity has a reputation for being unpredictable." The corners of Kane's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. "Unpredictable. That's one way to put it." Torvin's patience wore thin. "Will you help us or not?" "Admiral." Kane's eyes narrowed. "If we do this, you'll need to trust us. We don't fight like you do. Our methods might seem unconventional." "You're avoiding the question," Cottle growled. "Are you sending your fleet or not?" Kane paused, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "We'll help, but don't expect the cavalry. We don't need a massive fleet to handle this." A hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving the council in stunned silence. A single human ship could not defeat the Swarm, let alone a small fleet. What were they thinking? Cottle voiced what everyone was feeling. "They're mocking us. This is a joke." But the young diplomat shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "They're serious. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Humans agree to help." Admiral Jonathan Kane leaned back in his chair aboard the Erebus, the flagship of Earth's Navy. Around him, the dimly lit command room hummed with quiet activity as officers monitored the transmission from the Galactic Alliance. Kane's face betrayed nothing, but inside, he couldn't help but feel a spark of grim satisfaction. "They're finally desperate enough to call us," he muttered under his breath. Beside him, Commander Rachel Grant, his second in command, raised an eyebrow. "Took them long enough," she said dryly. "Do you think they realize what they've just invited?" Kane smirked but said nothing. His attention turned to the holographic display in the center of the room, which showed the fractured and panicked faces of the Alliance Council. Their desperation was almost palpable, even through the digital projection. They had no idea what humanity was capable of. "Sir," an officer called from the tactical station. "Alliance transmission incoming. They formally requested our assistance." Kane nodded. "Patch it through." The hologram flickered to life, and Chancellor Torvin's green, insect-like face reappeared. His antennae twitched nervously. "Admiral Kane," Torvin began, his tone tense, "the Galactic Alliance has officially voted to accept your offer of assistance. We will rely on humanity to repel the swarm." Kane leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Good decision. But understand this, humanity does not fight for free." Torvin bristled. "Are you demanding payment? Resources? What do you want?" "Simple," Kane replied. "Once this is over, humanity will have a permanent seat on the Galactic Council. No more debates about whether we belong. Agree to this, and we'll send our fleet." The council erupted into chaos, their voices overlapping in protest. "Outrageous," Cottle snarled. "You're exploiting our desperation." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You're asking us to fight your war. If we save you, we're not going to be ignored when the dust settles. Those are our terms." Torvin hesitated, his compound eyes flicking toward his fellow council members. They were out of options, and they all knew it. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. Humanity will have a seat on the council." "Excellent." Kane's tone was as sharp as a blade. "Expect our fleet within the hour." The transmission ended, and Kane turned to Grant, who was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "An hour?" she asked. "We're sending the smallest fleet we've ever deployed. Do you think it'll be enough?" Kane's smirk returned. "Oh, it's more than enough." The fleet assembles. Exactly 57 minutes later, the Erebus and 6 other ships left Earth's orbital docks. Compared to the massive fleets of the Galactic Alliance, the human fleet looked pitifully small. Each ship was sleek and dark, designed for efficiency rather than intimidation. But hidden beneath their unassuming exteriors was technology that even the most advanced Alliance races couldn't begin to understand. As the fleet traveled through hyperspace, Kane addressed his crew. "Listen up," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "The Galactic Alliance doesn't believe in us. They think we're sending a token force, a gesture of goodwill. Let's show them what humans are capable of." The crew erupted in cheers, their confidence unshaken. They had been through this before. Humanity's strength wasn't in numbers or raw firepower. It was in strategy, adaptability, and the willingness to do what others wouldn't dare. The arrival. When the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the sight that greeted them was grim. The Alliance forces were in disarray, their ships scattered and burning as the swarm pressed its attack. Thousands of enemy vessels filled the void, moving like a living organism, coordinated and relentless. The Galactic Alliance commanders were stunned when they saw the humans' tiny fleet. On the main Alliance channel, a voice crackled through, thick with disdain. "Is that it? This is the fleet you sent to save us?" Kane ignored the remark and opened a direct line to the Alliance commanders. "We'll handle this," he said simply. "Pull your forces back and stay out of our way." Before the Alliance could argue, the human ships began moving. Their formations were unlike anything the Alliance had seen. Tight, precise, and almost hypnotic. The small fleet darted through the chaos like a needle threading through fabric, evading the swarm's attacks with ease. But it wasn't just their movements that were strange. Each ship began deploying dozens of small drones, which swarmed the battlefield in perfect synchronization. The drones emitted bursts of electromagnetic energy, disrupting the swarm's sensors and communications. In an instant, the enemy's relentless coordination faltered. Suspense builds. On the Alliance flagship, the commanders watched in awe. "How are they doing this?" one officer whispered. "Those ships are so small. How are they outmaneuvering the swarm?" Kotal, ever the skeptic, growled, "This is only the beginning. Let's see how long they last." But deep down, even he couldn't ignore the rising feeling in his chest. Hope. The humans might just be able to pull off the impossible. As the Erebus led the charge, Kane's voice echoed through his ship. "This is where we show them why humanity survives. They wanted our help. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." The arrival of the smallest fleet. The Galactic Alliance watched in disbelief as the human fleet approached. 7 ships. 7 tiny, unremarkable ships. No grand armada, no intimidating flagship bristling with weapons. Just a small formation of vessels gliding into the chaos of the battlefield. On the bridge of the Alliance flagship, Commander Selek, a reptilian alien with scurred scales, paced furiously. His tail lashed against the floor as he stared at the tactical display. "This is madness," he hissed. "They send us toys to fight a hurricane." Admiral Kotal, seated in the command chair, growled low in his throat. "They're mocking us. No species would dare send so little in the face of such a threat unless they intended to humiliate us." The holoscreen displayed the human flagship, Erebus. Compared to the massive warships of the Alliance, it looked like a speck of dust. Its sleek, dark hull reflected the eerie glow of the battlefield, giving it an almost ghost-like appearance. "Open a channel." Select snapped. "I'll demand an explanation." The human response. Admiral Jonathan Kane's face appeared on the screen, calm and composed. "I assume you're calling to question our fleet size," he said, his voice laced with a subtle challenge. Select's jaw tightened. "Fleet size? This isn't a fleet. It's a scouting party. Do you understand the scale of the threat we're facing? The swarm numbers in the thousands. And you bring this." Kane didn't flinch. "We bring what's necessary." "Necessary?" Select's voice rose. "This isn't a joke. Lives are being lost by the second." Kane's expression hardened, his calm replaced by a sharp edge. "Do you think we don't know what's at stake? Trust us or don't. But either way, stay out of our way." Before Select could respond, the channel cut. Kane turned to his crew, his voice steady and commanding. "Let's remind the galaxy why they fear us." The first move. The Erebus led the formation, its smaller ships trailing in a tight diamond pattern. The swarm shifted its attention, thousands of their vessels turning toward the incoming human fleet like predators sensing prey. The battlefield grew still for a moment, as if the universe itself held its breath. And then the swarm attacked. Hundreds of enemy ships surged forward, their weapons lighting up the void. The Alliance forces braced themselves for another massacre, but the human fleet didn't flinch. Instead, they moved with precision and speed that defied logic. The Erebus fired no weapons. Instead, it released a swarm of drones, hundreds of them, zipping through the enemy ranks like sparks in a firestorm. The smaller human ships followed suit, each deploying its own drones, until the battlefield was alive with thousands of tiny glowing machines. "What are they doing?" Select muttered, his claws digging into the console. "Those aren't weapons." "Are they?" Disruption. The swarm's vessels began to falter. Their formations broke apart as the human drones emitted bursts of electromagnetic energy, scrambling their targeting systems and communications. The once coordinated enemy fleet descended into chaos, their ships colliding with one another in confusion. On the Alliance flagship, Kotal leaned forward, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "They've crippled the swarm's coordination," he murmured. "How?" It's like they're dancing," Selleck said, watching the human fleet weave effortlessly through the chaos. The Erebus and its companions were outnumbered 100-1, yet they moved as if they owned the battlefield. The turning tide. The humans finally struck. While the swarm was still disoriented, the Erebus fired a single beam of energy that sliced through an enemy cruiser, splitting it in half. The smaller human ships followed, targeting critical points with surgical precision. Each shot counted. No weapon was wasted. On the Alliance flagship, the officers were stunned into silence. Selak, unable to contain his disbelief, muttered, "There, toying with the swarm." Cottle, who had been the humans' harshest critic, spoke quietly, his voice tinged with awe. "No, they're dissecting them. The enemy reacts." The swarm, now aware of the threat the humans posed, redirected their forces. Massive warships, bristling with weapons, moved to engage the tiny fleet. But the humans didn't retreat. Instead, they adapted. Their ships split into smaller groups, each executing a unique maneuver to evade the enemy's fire. One Alliance officer, a young alien with wide, insect-like eyes, whispered, "It's as if they know what the swarm will do before they do it." Cottle's claws tapped against the armrest of his chair. They're not just fighting. They're analyzing, learning. Suspense builds. As the swarm's largest warship entered the fray, the tension in the Alliance fleet reached its peak. This new vessel dwarfed anything the humans had faced so far. Its weapons hummed with a terrifying energy, and its mere presence seemed to darken the stars around it. Selak turned to Cottle, his voice trembling. "Even the humans can't take that thing down." Cottle's gaze remained fixed on the Erebus. "If they can't, we're all dead." On board the Erebus, Kane stood at the center of his bridge, his eyes locked on the colossal enemy ship. His crew waited for orders, their trust in him absolute. "Prepare the next phase," Kane said calmly. "Let's give them something to remember. A mysterious technology." The swarm's colossal warship loomed over the battlefield, its dark hull glowing with eerie energy. It was the size of a moon, a floating fortress bristling with weaponry capable of obliterating planets. As it powered up its main cannon, a low hum reverberated across the void, a sound that seemed to reach into the very bones of everyone present. On the Galactic Alliance flagship, a tense silence hung in the air. Even Cottle, known for his bravado, sat rigid, his claws gripping the armrests of his chair. "No fleet has ever survived against a Titan-class warship," he muttered. "Not even the humans." But Admiral Jonathan Kane didn't flinch. Standing on the bridge of the Erebus, he studied the holographic projection of the massive enemy ship with a calm, calculating gaze. His crew moved with quiet efficiency, their trust in him unshaken despite the odds. "Commander Grant," Kane said, his voice steady, "activate the black veil." Grant hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sir, you're sure?" Kane's lips curved into a faint smile. "Let's remind them why humanity is underestimated at their own peril." The black veil. At Kane's command, the Erebus and the other human ships emitted a strange pulse of energy. Instantly, the sleek vessels shimmered and disappeared from view, vanishing into the void as if swallowed by the darkness. The drones scattered across the battlefield followed suit, fading into nothingness. On the Alliance flagship, chaos erupted. Where did they go? Selleck barked, his claws clicking furiously on the console. "Have they retreated?" Cottle shook his head, his sharp eyes narrowing. "No, they're still here, somewhere." The swarm, too, hesitated. Their ships spread out, scanning the area with frantic urgency. The massive warship turned slowly, its weapons firing blindly into the void in an attempt to flush out its invisible prey. The ghosts in the void. Kane's voice echoed across the Erebus. Phase 2. Begin precision strikes. One by one, the human ships reappeared for mere seconds at a time, firing devastating shots at key targets before vanishing again. The swarm's vessels erupted in flames, their critical systems obliterated with surgical precision. The Black Veil technology, a closely guarded human secret, allowed their ships to bend light and energy around them, rendering them virtually invisible. It wasn't just cloaking. It was tactical invisibility, combined with advanced AI that calculated enemy movements with terrifying accuracy. "Admiral," Grant reported, her voice calm despite the tension. "Enemy coordination is crumbling. They're firing on each other." Kane nodded. "Good. Keep the pressure on. Make them feel the fear they've instilled in others." The colossal warship fights back. The swarm's Titan-class warship wasn't so easily fooled. Its main cannon began to glow brighter, gathering energy for a devastating blast. The energy beam erupted from its core, slicing through the battlefield like a sword of molten light. 2 human ships narrowly avoided the blast, their cloaking flickering for a moment before stabilizing. On board the Erebus, Kane's expression grew grim. "They're adapting faster than expected." The swarm began deploying their own drones, smaller but numerous, designed to detect energy fluctuations. They swarmed the area, searching for signs of the cloaked human ships. The battlefield turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. "Human ingenuity. Deploy Spectre Protocol," Kane ordered. At his command, the human drones began releasing holographic decoys, perfect replicas of their ships, each emitting false energy signatures. The swarm's sensors went wild, overwhelmed by hundreds of identical targets. Kotal and Silak watched in stunned silence as the battlefield descended into chaos. "They're making fools of the swarm," Silak said, his voice filled with disbelief. Kotal didn't respond. For the first time in his career, he was at a loss for words. Turning the tables. The Erebus reappeared directly in the shadow of the swarm's massive warship, its dark hull dwarfed by the enemy's size. Kane's voice was calm as he issued his next command. "Target their power core. 1 shot. Make it count." A single beam of energy erupted from the Erebus, piercing through layers of the warship's thick armor. The swarm vessel shuddered, its lights flickering as the beam tore into its power systems. But it wasn't enough to destroy it. The warship retaliated with a barrage of energy blasts, forcing the Erebus to retreat. "They're still operational," Grant reported, her tone tense. "And they're angry." The suspense peaks. The swarm's warship began charging its main cannon again, this time aiming directly at the Erebus. Alliance officers on their flagship stared in horror as the human ship seemed trapped, out of options. Kotal leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "If the humans fail..." Silak finished his thought. "We're all doomed." Kane stood unmoving on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. He glanced at Grant and gave a small nod. "Prepare the final move." The Erebus and its fleet disappeared once more into the void, leaving the battlefield eerily silent. The swarm's warship turned slowly, scanning for its elusive prey. And then, without warning, the Erebus reappeared. Directly above the swarm's warship, its hull glowing with energy. "Execute the overload maneuver," Kane said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Let's finish this." Turning the tide. The battlefield froze in stunned silence as the Erebus reappeared above the swarm's colossal warship. Its dark hull glowed with a strange, pulsating energy, as if it were alive. This was humanity's most dangerous secret weapon, an experimental energy system capable of immense destruction, but with devastating risks to its operators. On board the Erebus, Admiral Jonathan Kane stood resolutely at the center of the bridge. The light from the ship's pulsating core cast eerie shadows across the room, making the moment feel even more intense. Commander Grant hesitated at her station, her fingers hovering over the console. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern, "if we overload the core, the ship may not survive." Kane turned to her, his expression unflinching. "Neither will they. We finish this here and now." The overload maneuver. The Erebus began its descent, moving toward the swarm's warship at a dangerously close range. The remaining human ships scattered, drawing the smaller swarm vessels away and leaving their flagship to face the Titan-class ship alone. The Alliance officers watching from their flagship couldn't believe what they were seeing. "They're insane," Selek muttered, his voice trembling. "They're going to ram it." Kotal shook his head. "No, they're doing something worse." The Erebus unleashed a wave of drones, but these weren't the precision tools of earlier battles. These drones carried high-yield explosives, and they swarmed the enemy warship like fireflies, burrowing into its armor and targeting critical systems. The swarm retaliated, firing wildly in every direction. The battlefield lit up with explosions, the sheer chaos masking the humans' true intent. A critical blow. As the Erebus closed the distance, Kane issued the final order. "Divert all power to the core. Prepare to release the energy pulse." Grant hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Core at maximum capacity," she reported. "We have 30 seconds before containment fails." "Good," Kane said, his voice unwavering. "All hands, brace for impact." The swarm's warship fired its main cannon, a massive beam of energy aimed directly at the Erebus. The human ship didn't dodge. Instead, it absorbed the energy, its hull glowing brighter with each passing second. The experimental core amplified the absorbed energy, turning it into a weapon far more devastating. The pulse of destruction. The Erebus released its energy pulse in a blinding flash of light. The wave rippled outward, passing through the swarm's warship and disabling its systems in an instant. The lights on the massive vessel flickered and died, its weapons falling silent. The pulse didn't stop there. It expanded across the battlefield, knocking out the swarm's smaller ships as well. The once coordinated enemy fleet collapsed into disarray, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. On the Galactic Alliance flagship, the officers watched in stunned silence. Selek blinked, his voice barely a whisper. "They've paralyzed the swarm." Kotal's claws gripped the armrest as he leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the Erebus. "And they're not done yet." The final strike. With the swarm's warship disabled, the Erebus launched its final assault. A concentrated beam of energy, powered by the overloaded core, struck the enemy vessel's power core. The resulting explosion lit up the void, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The swarm's massive warship broke apart, its pieces scattering into the darkness. The remaining enemy vessels, disorganized and leaderless, began retreating. The human fleet regrouped, their ships battered but victorious. The Erebus drifted in silence, its hull scorched and its systems barely operational. Yet it stood as a testament to humanity's resilience and ingenuity. Alliance awe. On the Alliance flagship, the bridge erupted in cheers, but Selek and Kotal remained silent. The reptilian general's gaze stayed fixed on the human fleet. "They turned the tide of the battle with 7 ships," he said, his voice filled with grudging respect. 7. Selek nodded slowly. "Their methods are reckless, dangerous, but effective. I see now why they waited so long to call for help." Kotal's expression darkened. "Yes, because once humanity steps in, they don't just win. They dominate." The suspense lingers. As the battlefield quieted, a message from the Erebus reached the Alliance flagship. Kane's face appeared on the screen, his uniform singed, but his expression calm. "The swarm is in retreat. The system is secure." Torvin, the Alliance leader, stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Admiral Kane, your actions, they were extraordinary. The Galactic Alliance owes you a debt of gratitude." Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then remember this moment the next time you doubt humanity." The transmission ended, leaving the Alliance leaders in a mix of awe and unease. The swarm had been defeated, but humanity's power had been revealed in a way that could never be ignored. The final gambit. The void was quiet now, but the silence was deceptive. Though the swarm's Titan-class warship had been destroyed and their fleet scattered, humanity's victory wasn't yet complete. The remaining swarm ships, though fewer, regrouped at the edge of the battlefield, their movements erratic but determined. They weren't retreating for long. They were recalibrating. On board the Erebus, alarms blared. Commander Grant glanced at the tactical display, her brow furrowed. "Admiral, the swarm isn't retreating. They're regrouping and activating something." Kane's jaw tightened as he studied the display. The remaining swarm vessels were forming a defensive sphere around a smaller ship, one that hadn't been part of the earlier engagement. Its hull pulsed with a faint red light, growing brighter with each passing second. "Is that a command vessel?" Grant asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Kane's eyes narrowed. "No, it's worse. That's a self-destruct mechanism. The swarm's last stand." The swarm's smaller ship wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a doomsday device. The glowing core at its center emitted energy waves that were growing stronger, threatening to unleash a catastrophic explosion that would engulf the entire star system. The Galactic Alliance fleet, battered and barely operational, began to panic. On their flagship, Chancellor Torvin paced nervously, his antennae twitching. "What is that thing? What are they planning?" Kotl's claws gripped the console tightly. "It's a scorched earth tactic. If they can't win, they'll destroy everything, including us." Selak turned to him, his scales pale with fear. "We have to stop it. Our ships can't survive another fight." Torvin's gaze shifted to the human fleet. "Admiral Kane, can you stop this?" The human response. Kane stood motionless, his mind working rapidly. The Erebus was barely operational, and the rest of his fleet was in no condition for another engagement. But retreat wasn't an option. Humanity had been called upon to save this system, and he wasn't about to fail. "Grant," Kane said, his voice calm but firm, "activate the fleet's Phoenix protocol." Grant froze for a moment. "Sir, that's experimental. It hasn't been tested on this scale. If it fails—" "It won't fail," Kane interrupted. "We don't have a choice. The Phoenix Protocol." The Phoenix Protocol was humanity's most daring innovation, a coordinated system that linked the energy cores of all human ships, allowing them to act as a single entity. It was designed for situations exactly like this, where the odds were insurmountable and conventional tactics had no chance of success. As the command was relayed, the human fleet moved into position, forming a tight formation around the Erebus. Energy beams arced between the ships, creating a glowing web of power that pulsed with increasing intensity. On the Alliance flagship, the display lit up with readings that defied comprehension. "What are they doing?" Selak asked, his voice filled with awe. Kotl's gaze was fixed on the human fleet. "They're turning themselves into a weapon. A race against time." The swarm's doomsday device continued to charge, its core now glowing a brilliant red. The Alliance's scanners predicted detonation in less than 5 minutes, a blast powerful enough to reduce the star system to ashes. Kane's voice rang out across the human fleet. "All ships, channel maximum power to the grid. We'll only have one shot at this." The Erebus took point, its damaged hull barely holding together under the strain of the combined energy. Kane's crew worked frantically, rerouting power and stabilizing the overloaded systems. "Target locked," Grant reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "We're ready." Kane nodded. "Fire." The energy surge. The combined energy of the human fleet surged forward, forming a massive beam of concentrated light. It streaked across the void, tearing through the swarm's defenses and striking the core of the doomsday device. For a moment, the battlefield was bathed in blinding light. The swarm's smaller ships disintegrated under the force of the blast, their protective sphere crumbling. The doomsday device shuddered, its glowing core destabilizing. On the Alliance flagship, Selak held his breath. Did it work? The explosion. The swarm's device detonated, but not as planned. Instead of unleashing a catastrophic blast, the human energy beam disrupted its core, containing the explosion within a collapsing singularity. The battlefield was silent once more, save for the faint hum of human ships powering down. The swarm was gone. Their threat neutralized. Victory and reflection. The Erebus and the remaining human ships limped back toward the Alliance fleet, their systems barely functional but victorious. On the Alliance flagship, Kotal rose from his seat, his expression a mix of admiration and unease. "They saved us," he said quietly, "but at what cost to themselves?" Torvin nodded slowly. "The cost doesn't matter. What matters is that humanity delivered when no one else could." As the Erebus approached, a final message from Kane appeared on their screens. He looked exhausted but resolute. "The swarm is gone. The system is safe. Remember this moment when you consider humanity's place in your alliance." The transmission ended, leaving the alliance leaders to ponder the full extent of humanity's power and the price of underestimating them. A shocking victory. The battlefield lay silent, strewn with the wreckage of swarm vessels. Stars shimmered through the void, now free of the chaos that had threatened to consume them. The humans' victory was absolute, but the cost lingered in the air, unspoken and heavy. On board the Erebus, Admiral Jonathan Kane stood at the observation window, gazing out at the remnants of the battle. His reflection in the glass was as grim as the scene outside. The ship was barely holding together, its hull scared, and its systems running on emergency power. Yet, despite the damage, the mission was a success. Commander Grant approached him, her steps careful, as if not to disturb the weight of the moment. "Admiral, all ships report operational, though barely. The Phoenix Protocol drained us to the brink." Kane nodded, his expression unreadable. "We survived. That's what matters." The Alliance responds. Back on the Galactic Alliance flagship, the mood was one of disbelief and awe. The council chamber, once a cacophony of fear and doubt, was now silent as the leaders watched the human fleet on their holo displays. Chancellor Torvin stood at the head of the room, his green skin pale. "They did it," he whispered. "They actually did it." Kotal rose from his seat, his hulking frame towering over the others. "We called them to save us, and they did. But at what cost to themselves?" His yellow eyes narrowed. "And what cost to the galaxy?" Selak, usually quick to voice his skepticism, remained quiet. He finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. "They showed us something today. Not just their power, but their resolve. They are a species that does not back down, no matter the odds." Recognition and unease. The Council's holo-communicator crackled to life, and Kane's image appeared, his face tired but resolute. "This system is secure," he said. "The swarm has been neutralized. You're safe, for now." Torvin stepped forward, his voice wavering. "Admiral Kane, on behalf of the Galactic Alliance, we thank you. Your actions, they were extraordinary." Kane's eyes met Torvin's through the transmission, and the weight of his gaze seemed to pierce the entire chamber. "You called for help because you had no other choice. Remember this moment when you debate humanity's place in your alliance. We are not saviors, but we are not expendable, either." Kotal stepped forward, his voice gruff. "You've proven your strength, Admiral. But strength like this is unsettling. What happens when we face you instead of the swarm?" Kane's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. "Then you'll see why we've survived every threat we've ever faced." The transmission ended, leaving the Alliance leaders to grapple with a new understanding of humanity, not just as allies, but as a force to be reckoned with. Human reflection. On board the Erebus, the mood was quiet, almost somber. The crew celebrated their victory, but there was no cheering, no grand revelry. They understood the weight of what they had done and the implications it carried. Grant broke the silence. "Admiral, do you think they'll see us differently now?" Kane turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. "They will, but whether they see us as allies or threats depends on what they fear more, the swarm or what we're capable of." The final message. As the human fleet prepared to depart, a final transmission was sent to the Alliance. Kane's voice echoed through the chamber one last time. "You called us because no one else could stand against the swarm. You doubted us, feared us, even resented us. But we came, and we won. Remember this: humanity does not fight for glory or gratitude. We fight to survive. And we will always survive. With that, the transmission ended, and the human fleet disappeared into the stars, leaving the Alliance to ponder their new reality. The aftermath. As the Galactic Alliance began to rebuild, the memory of the battle with the Swarm lingered. Humanity's role in the galaxy had shifted. They were no longer the quiet, isolated species on the edge of space. They were now a power that couldn't be ignored, one that inspired both awe and fear. And far beyond the stars, where no light reached, something watched. Something that had seen the Swarm fall and humanity rise. It waited, silent and patient, knowing that the galaxy's greatest challenge was still to come.